Today I'm talking about Maffetone style low heart rate training after 838 miles. 11.01 miles, 8 minutes, 59 seconds per mile, 136 beats per minute on our recovery run today, finishing out my longest week ever in terms of mileage, hitting over 90 miles for this week, and finishing at least the work portion of my Houston Marathon training block. Now I've just got 2 weeks of taper ahead of me and then the race. And I thought this would be a really great time now that this entire marathon training block is complete to talk about where I am with Maffetone. That's why the number is a little bit odd. I was thinking I would wait till 1,000 miles to do this video, but I thought right at the end of Houston Marathon training, at least the work portion would be probably a better spot to put it. In terms of kind of background, what is Maffetone style running? What is low heart rate training? The idea, I think the easiest way to put it for me is Maffetone style low heart rate training is a style of training that just puts a very specific kind of definition on the word easy. I think we're all comfortable with the concept of run your easy days easy. What Maffetone does is gives a definition to what easy means in a way that you don't have to understand your max heart rate, your lactate threshold, your VO2 max, any of those kinds of things. All you need to know is your age, and the formula is simple: 180 minus your age. For me, I'm 40, just turned 40 a little while ago, so that puts me at 140 beats per minute, plus or minus 5. There's little kind of tweaks you can do to it depending on your current level of fitness. And so I've been using 145 as my Maffetone number, and that's the max heart rate that I've been running pretty much all of my runs for this entire marathon training block. It's been a total of 10 weeks that I've been doing this for the last 838 miles. And I'll go into what I mean by most of my miles at that heart rate, but that's kind of the range. In the beginning, I was running, I didn't do a MAF test. Like there's a specific test that you can do under Maffetone to kind of figure out where you are, where you stand along in progress. I didn't do a MAF test at the beginning, but instead I'll take an example from a run one weekend, just on a Monday, and it was 9.5 mile run, and tried to stay at 145 beats per minute or lower, which for me was maddeningly difficult. I felt like I was walking a lot of the time. I don't think I was walking a lot on this particular run. After about a week of it, I think I kind of got at least somewhat of a hang of it, and I'd gotten some issues with my heart rate sensor figured out. And so that run was 9 minutes and 30 seconds per mile on average for the entire 9.5 mile run, in the 9:30s towards the end of that run, and we're like the meat of that run. So I think 9 minutes 30 seconds-ish seconds per mile is kind of my starting point. From then I ran that style and ran all my miles, 100% of my miles, at that heart rate as a max, kind of as a speed limit or an effort limit is probably a better way to put it. For the next 500 miles, at which point I did take a MAF test. And for that MAF test, which was on December 7th, my results came in at about 8 minutes and 40 seconds per mile. So about 50 seconds per mile faster at the same level of exertion, or at least as far as my heart was concerned, the same level of exertion. I felt like I was working a little bit harder. I felt like I was able to run a little bit rather than kind of like always constantly slowing myself down to stay within the heart rate range. but it seemed like there was pretty good progress there. And then most recently, I have kind of two measuring sticks that I'll use since I didn't do another MAF test. In this 90-mile week that I ran, I had the last long run, which was yesterday's video, which was a 20-mile run with a 13-mile goal marathon heart rate effort in it, where I tried to run at about 165 beats per minute for 13.1 miles. And that brought me in at an hour and 30 minutes and 42 seconds, which was fantastic. But to kind of compare a little bit more apples to apples in terms of kind of my MAF paces, I had a 6-mile morning commute on Friday, which is the day after a speed workout, and a double on Thursday, and I also had a double on Friday. But in the morning for Friday, I ran 6 miles, and my average pace for that time was 8 minutes and 43 seconds per mile at 139 beats per minute. So about the same as my MAF test from a couple hundred miles of training earlier, but in the middle of the longest mileage week I've ever run, and at a lower heart rate than my MAF heart rate. So I feel like, again, more progress. I'm feeling good. So what was the difference between miles 500 in terms of Maffetone and now? That's the speed work that I've kind of brought back in. And the speed work that I brought back in was probably different than what most people think of as speed work. It wasn't 400s, it wasn't 200, it wasn't even 800s. It was mile intervals or longer. And so rather than go through the entire laundry list of everything I've done, I'll type it out and I'll put it on the screen and I'll kind of give you the overall gist. I started out on December 12th, just doing 2 times 1 mile repeats as part of my morning commute run going downtown. And that was hard. And I tried to hit my goal marathon pace, which is 6:52 per mile, or just under 3 hours for a marathon. And that was really hard. The first mile came in at 6:55, the second came in at 7:19, and my heart rate was racing. I was at 171 beats per minute for the first one and 169 for the second, which is really high, and it felt like I was just working so insanely hard, and I was having a hard time just making it through the 1 mile interval, and I couldn't even think about how I would extrapolate that out to 26.2. Overall, there's been a progression going from 1 mile intervals to much longer intervals, anything between marathon heart rate or a number that I've kind of guessed and I'm assuming might work for me. So I'm thinking anywhere between that marathon heart rate and that marathon goal pace is what I've been doing some of these intervals at, keeping things all the while every other mile when I'm resting in between my mile intervals, when I'm just doing recovery runs, all my other runs, those are all at Maffetone pace. Kind of have been watching a lot of videos about low heart rate training by Floris Gierman and Triathlon Terran. Those are two guys that have posted a lot of stuff about low heart rate training and talking about Maffetone style training as well. Triathlon Terran talks about low heart rate training, a lot of different iterations of it, as well as Maffetone, but instructive anyway. And Floris talks to a lot and interviews a lot of people and asks them about what they're doing for their races. A lot of them who are about my age, end up in this 160 to 165 range. So that's kind of what I was shooting for. So I've gone back and looked using Polar to see my week by week progression in terms of paces. It's increasing. Which makes sense because I've added in speed work over the last 4 weeks. But what I've also noticed is that as I've shifted after that 500 mile mark to a more polarized approach in the short amount of time that I've had, even though I'm adding in these longer blocks where I'm running at 165 or even up to 170 in terms of heart rate beats per minute, overall, I'm still spending less than 20% of my time at that hard work heart rate range. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is that because I'm getting better at running at that Maffetone heart range, I'm not accidentally going over it, which is something that would happen all the time in the beginning phases because I was just having such a hard time keeping my heart rate low as I was running. And so it would accidentally creep up to 150, 155, even 160, even though I was running 9-minute, 30-second miles. That would just happen on accident all the time. And what I've noticed is using the polar flow data, the way you can chop it up, is that the amount of time I'm spending in that Maffetone heart range, even though this week I ran a 90-mile week with a 13 mile at marathon heart rate interval and a 4 mile interval at, so 17 working miles, that 4 miles being at marathon pace, which was in the 170s for heart rate. I'm actually spending more time in my Maffetone heart range now as a percentage of my overall weekly exertion than I was in the beginning. So that's promising to me that I can kind of get into that working range quickly and then get back into my Maffetone range, my recovery, my strength building range quickly, and I can actually stay there when I want to be in there. Because what I've found is now that I'm not so frustrated running at my kind of Maffetone paces, is that I'm okay not trying to eke out every second per mile faster by trying to run right at 145 or my Maffetone number. I'm shooting for 140 and kind of like, if I go up a little bit, I'll be at 143, 144, maybe 145. Or I'm finding myself spending a lot of time in the mid to low 130s, which still feels similar in terms of like running 140 versus running 135. Feels similar, and I feel like I'm still getting the same level of workout. The miles kind of seem easy, but I'm staying in kind of my ranges. And so I feel like things have been working out well. I feel like there's been a lot of progress. The weird thing about running this many miles with the Maffetone method is that I've never finished a marathon training block feeling so fresh. This was a peak week. I think the most I'd ever run before was 84 miles, and that was like 3 weeks ago. Before this marathon training block, I'd never run an 80-mile week. And I think in this marathon training block, I ran 7 80-mile weeks or more. That 1 week during Christmas, I took 2 days off of running, and I still had 70 miles for the week. So I've been averaging over 80 miles per week for the last 8 weeks. 8 weeks is over 80 miles per week. And so that's been incredible. The last marathon training block for Chicago, I think we topped out at like 69 miles for the week. That was a very different kind of training plan. Tons of speed work in there. So a good amount of long runs, but it was either a very long run or very short and very, very fast. And so a different kind of approach, a different style of training. I think Maffetone, this style plays more to my strengths. So with that in mind, let's talk about the goal and what's going to happen, at least according to all the race predictors in Houston in just a couple of weeks. Something that I like to do for all of my marathons after I finish all the work and get into the taper is start crunching numbers. I don't know why I do it. It always just makes me feel bad. But I think it's an interesting thought experiment. So I'm going to look at 4 different race predictors today to kind of talk about, okay, so what does the science, I guess, think, and these predictors aren't perfect, but what does the science think about what I've been doing for this marathon training block? So the first thing that I'll look at is Metathon. And Metathon is kind of like an automated way of using the Tanda race predictor, which is something that I really like. And what it takes into account is a prior race result, your age, the amount of miles you've been running, and the pace that you've been running all of your miles. Metathon does it doing an 8-week look back. And if I do that, and you just connect to your Strava data, and then it just takes a minute and it crunches the numbers for you and it gives you a result. And the Tanda number the Metathon number that I got was 3 hours, 15 minutes, and 20 seconds. Looking at my last 8 weeks of work, which I think a weakness in the Metathon model is that it looks so far back that it doesn't, I think, give you a chance to really show what you've been doing in that finishing portion of your marathon training block, i.e. the last 4 weeks for me. So it's overvaluing kind of like the building portion of a marathon training block and maybe not as accurately taking into account what's happening in the last 4 weeks or like the finishing phase. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Metathon's going to be exactly right. We'll have to see in a couple of weeks. So the next thing I looked at was Tanda, which is what Metathon is based off of. But with Tanda, you can kind of tweak your numbers a little bit and play with the numbers a little bit more. And so what I did was I went back to Polar Flow to figure out what my mileage was for the last 4 weeks and what my overall running time was for those 4 weeks. And from there, I calculated, I don't know why it doesn't calculate it for you, but I calculated an average pace per mile for the last 4 weeks of work. and using that in Tanda, that gave me off of 81.2 miles on average for the last 4 weeks, a time of 3 hours, 10 minutes, and 1 second, which is 1 second off of my Boston qualifying time, or what I would need to qualify for Boston. And so I think that's closer and more accurate given the work that I've been putting in the last 4 weeks. The next race predictor that I'll look at is from 5:38. And this is one that's a little bit more interesting because it seems to, at least the next two that I'm looking at, are really focusing on prior races, but also weekly mileage, which to me makes a lot of sense. Doesn't take into account the pace of your miles though. So I think there's going to be a lot of assumptions that are built into this that I think could make it wrong. But here's why I like these numbers. I'll tell you why. So under 5:38, using my prior half marathon PR, which is from last September, and using my current figure that I used, that 81.2 for the last 4 weeks of average weekly mileage, that gives me a time of 3 hours, 3 minutes, and 27 seconds, which sounds nice. And that's kind of where I'm thinking I'm going to be. In my gut, I'm thinking lining up around 305 or some with other runners who are looking to hit 305, and then kind of playing up or playing down depending on how I'm feeling that day, depending on what the weather's like in Houston. And the last thing that I'll look at is the Runner's World Race Predictor, which using my last half marathon PR and that 81.2 miles per week of mileage gives me a time of 2:59:53, which I really love hearing that number. I'm not sure it's an accurate predictor, so we'll have to see what that does. So those are the race predictions. That's what Maffetone style running has been doing for me over the last 838 miles, but over the last 300 or so miles, specifically building off of kind of the other videos that I made at the 250 and the 500 mile mark. So I feel like this is a training method that seems to work for me. I think that the Houston Marathon is going to be too soon to really show what it can really do for me. But then again, has anyone ever really done training? And so if I waited to run a marathon until I was ready, I'd never run another marathon. So 2 weeks from now is as good a time as any. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the time's ultimately going to be. I'm looking forward to seeing if this 165 number, 160 to 165, at least for the bulk of the marathon, is going to be a prudent number to try and run at, or it's going to be too easy or too hard. I'm not sure. There's only one way to find out, and we'll see in a couple of weeks. So I think that this low heart rate style of running works for me. I know that a lot of you think it's bonkers. I know a lot of you think it's ludicrous to use heart rate training in a way that doesn't take a max heart rate into effect or use percentages of lactate threshold. That's okay. I'm not trying to convince you to run this way. I don't think it's for everyone. I think it's for a specific type of runner, the type of runner that I am, and that I think a lot of people are. So I think it could help a lot of people. But I don't think it's snake oil. I don't think it's voodoo. I think it kind of actually works. But again, we'll see in a couple weeks. Stay tuned for the race video and for the race recap. No matter what, it's going to be interesting. No matter what, I think I'm going to have a lot of fun running this race. And I just want to have a strong race, a strong showing. The number is going to be what the number is going to be. I'm totally okay with that. That doesn't mean I don't really want to push and see what that number can be. But, I'm not beholden to it. I'm not a slave to it like I think I was as I was approaching the last marathon. So the idea is to run a little bit more unencumbered, to run light. And again, just to have fun. So if you have any questions about what I'm doing for the marathon in terms of the heart rate or about low heart rate training in general, put them in the comments down below. I'd love to talk to you guys down there, but I'm not an expert. But I do know that there are a lot of people who are training and have been training this way for a long time that have been in the comments. So I'm sure that you'll be able to get some answers to your questions, or at least not answers, some guidance that can help you. I think ultimately you just got to get out there and do it if you're interested in this. That's what I've been doing, and it's been an interesting experiment. Now, before I go, I do want to remind you guys about the charity runner for this week. This week, it's Thomas Conibere, who's running the London Marathon and raising money for the Meningitis Research Foundation. I was happy to donate $70 to Thomas's fundraising efforts, and I'll post a link in the description in case you would like to learn more. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of the video, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Yo, what's going on?